you don't mind if I film some of this.
Not at all. Happy to share this. So, I'm telling you, these two of the main aquatic plants in the Barrow Peninsula and across the Arctic is Arctophila. This is a Carex aquatilis. This plant is actually very abundant across North America and Eurasia. This is a sedge, and then there's Arctophila fulva, that more reddish color, which grows in deeper water.
So we're looking at two different plants here.
Two different plants. That's a grass. This is a sedge. However, they both act as methane straws. And they have hollow compartments in their tissue. They actually use as flotation devices. But these gas chambers basically are conducting methane from the soil, and through their arenchyma, that's the term, the arenchyma, and out through the leaves into the atmosphere. And they use that, as you can see, they're all kind of floating. Otherwise, let me try to grab one and kind of show you. Just we can take it apart.
Yeah.
Sorry, roots are not that long for this, but yeah. So they're basically hollow,
yeah.
hollow in the
Oh,
center,
wow.
hollow in the center, and they're very efficient at transporting. That's where transporting methane from the soil directly into the atmosphere, bypassing this water column, because the water here has oxygen, and when methane is getting diffused into the water, it gets reduced into CO2.
Right.
And CO2 is not as potent greenhouse gas as methane is. So these plants are basically highways of methane transport. Yeah.
So do they reduce, or they outgas the methane to change the water quality for their benefit, or?
No, so I'm not really, I don't fully understand this mechanistic link. There's probably some literature on that, but what they do is they use that gas in the soil, which they absorb in the roots, to hold it in their tissue, but it's basically cycling through the tissue, right?
Wow. That's interesting. It's almost, my high school students would say, "Oh, the plant is farting." That's like
basically it
wow.
is. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
So whatever the microbial decomposition that exists in the water, it's able to take the methane that would be captured and release it into the air.
Yeah. So the water has oxygen, right, and CO2. So instead of CH4, which is the molecule for methane, the oxygen, it gets combined with that carbon, with the methane molecule, and then now it's CO2 instead of CH4. So you need that oxic layer. In this case, the water has oxygen, so that will reduce methane into CO2.
So this water is anoxic, you said? Or?
No, oxic.
Oh, okay.
Oxic.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it contains oxygen.
Yeah.
However, below the surface on the soil is generally anoxic.
Okay.
Right.
That makes
it's
sense.
Generally anoxic.
And that's where you'd see
and
the
that's
decomposition.
where decomposition is happening. But decomposition is in anoxic decomposition. That means methane, basically.
Right.
That's producing methane.
So would this be an indicator if you saw more of these grasses that there'd be much more methane being released into the atmosphere?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I study, is how these ponds are changing over time over the past 50 to 75 years. And we found that there's more plants, more aquatic plants than there was back in found 50 years ago, 1970s. So we know that the density of the plants is higher. We also see that Artophila and Carex have actually encroached these systems.
Oh, wow.
And there's less open water now, and there's more aquatic vegetation. So that means that more aquatic vegetation, more straws, more farting plants, basically.
Wow. And so are you finding that there's more methane as a result of an increase in the...
Yeah. And we published this study showing how the increasing biomass, and also we also see an increasing active layer, which is the layer that freezes and thaws annually.
Right.
It's actually deeper in these ponds now, so you have more carbon available for microbes to produce methane, so that it's also a main driver of methane as well for the past 50 years.
So in general, the deeper the active layer, the more decomposition, the more methane.
Yes, and that will be, but only for areas where there's, it's also true for drier areas, right? But areas where there's wet, that decomposition is going to be anoxic, right? So, yeah.
So,
and producing methane,
wow. So I'd really be curious to see what the data looks like from the 70s till now, and how much more methane there is in the atmosphere, or in this region, I should say.
Yeah, generally here it's kind of well mixed, the atmosphere, because we got this breeze from the ocean. We're in a little peninsula, basically the Barrow Peninsula, but globally methane has increased, and it's actually right now kind of spiking up.
Right.
And it's kind of, and one of the studies that I'll be working on is kind of trying to see if these Arctic wetlands are part of that spike or not. So,
Right. And I guess the other question is, there's always the debate. This might just be a natural cycle that one sees. Is that something that you sort of agree with, or is this an acceleration of that cycle due to climate forces?
Yeah, well, most, I guess, okay, let me step back there for a second. There are cycles that take, thousands of years, but, over the past, basically, 50 years or 100 years, we've seen kind of like a spike in temperatures, atmospheric temperatures across the globe, right? And the Arctic is actually warming 3 times or 4 times faster than the rest of the world. And that's because in the ocean, which is kind of a mile away from here, we see less sea ice, and the sea ice has very important implications for albedo, how the energy of the sun, right, is reflected back to the sky, right? But without ice, you have open water absorbs more radiation, and this is kind of like induces this positive feedback of warming. So, because this is a coastal area, Barrow alone, and one of my studies shows that it has increased in temperature about 3 degrees Celsius over the past 60 years.
3 degrees, that's incredible.
Yeah, in the summertime. And over annual scale is also like 4 degrees. So that increasing warming, and that's where I'm getting back to your question, that increasing warming has actually promoted permafrost thaw. So the table of the permafrost, or like the bottom of the active layer, is actually going lower, and it's making that active layer thicker, right? So that's actually producing more decomposition of carbon that was actually stored hundreds or if not thousands of years ago, right? So it's making that carbon available to microbes that were otherwise be packed away frozen, but now they're available. So yeah, and so